record these sessions and we put it on YouTube at the end of the screen in front of okay.
Okay, passing these along. And there's quite a lot more on these sheets than we'll probably get through, which is just, it was more just to fill in for general interest. Okay, so there's a number of mitzvot which we have in this week's parsha. So I want to speak about one of them, which is the requirement not to add anything to the Torah, not to add any new elements or new mitzvot into the Torah beyond what's given to us. So this is what we refer to as Bal Tosif, don't add, the mitzvah of not adding. So problem is, we know that a lot of what we do is not from the Torah directly by nature, but rather from the Rabbanim. There's a lot of things which we do which is biblical, but also much which was added by the Rabbanim in different formats for various reasons. So the question is, how does that work without violating this mitzvah that we have, that we shouldn't add anything to the Torah? So for example, we have Hanukkah and Purim. We have which are rabbinic by nature, which are rabbinic festivals. How does that fit into this mitzvah of Bal Tosif, of not adding? Also things like we have some mitzvah which have Doraita elements, which have biblical elements, and then rabbinic elements. So for example, shofar, we have a requirement to blow 30 times, but we blow 100 times. So we've added on another 70. So how do we have how can we do that without, again, infringing upon this So I wanted to just bring the psukim which we learned this from, and a couple of the Rishonim, which are the earlier commentators, and their takes on what the parameters of this mitzvah are. To give it a bit of insight as to how far this extends. So look at source number 1, which is from this week's parsha. It's called Hadavar Asher Anochi Mitzaveh Etchem Oto Tishmeu La'asot Lo Tosef Alav V'lo Tigram Mimenu. All the thing which I've commanded you to do, to guard and to do, Lo Tosef Alav, you shouldn't add on to it, V'lo Tigram Mimenu, and you shouldn't detract from it. If we look at Rashi, so I brought the whole Rashi from the passage for the third line, Lo Tosef Alav. Rashi brings some examples of what is meant by this command. So it says Chamesh Totafot. So we know that there are 4 sections to our tefillin, and there are 4 sections we have. Someone made it 5. They thought, you know what, I fancy adding another one. Or Chamesh Minim B'Lulav. If someone brought 5 species instead of 4, you've got your Lulav, Etrog, Hadas, and your Aravot, and you thought, I don't know, we're gonna add an English element. You wanted to bring a bit of oak or something like that, and you sort of thought, I'm gonna have a fifth species. That would be a violation of this that we shouldn't add on. And then he brings another example, which is Arba Brachot Lebirchat Kohanim, which is so we know that the Kohanim have 3 brachot. They say to us, if one of the Kohanim on Yom Tov gets really excited and really wants to bless the congregation and throws in another one, another pasuk, another something, that would also be a violation of this that we shouldn't add on. This isn't the only time we have this mitzvah. We had this 2 weeks ago in Parshat B'Echana. So I brought the pasuk there. Lo tosifu al hadavar asher anochi mitzaveh etchem v'lo tigra'u mimenu lishmar et mitzvot Hashem Elokeichem asher anochi mitzaveh etchem. We shouldn't add on to the mitzvot which Hashem commanded us, etc. We shouldn't diminish from them to guard the mitzvot of Hashem, which I commanded you. So that's a similar, very similar pasuk. And then Rashi has a similar idea on that. Chamesh parashat b'tefillin, again 5 parashot in tefillin. Chamesh minim b'lulav, 5 species when we bring the lulav, and chamesh tzitziot. He changes the last example, which is a little bit interesting, where he says if you had your sitzah had 5 strands of sitzah rather opposed to 4, that would also come under this category. Okay, so from Rashi it seems that Bal Tosif is when we have a mitzvah and we decided, you know what, we can do it better, we can expand it, we can build on it, and we try and throw in extra things from our own sort of volition, and that's is going to be included in this command that we can't add on. I want to look at the Ramban. The Ramban takes it in and expands on that definition and adds a new point, which is quite important. So, the first section of the Ramban is quoting Rashi and bringing sources for it. If you look at the second bolded section, starting from Aval, about 4 lines down in the Ramban, so he's just quoted all the Rashi examples of adding on to things, and then he says, Aval lo ba'ela b'vadam. Not only with these things, was it said, even someone who sleeps on the 8th night, so Shmini Atzeret night in the sukkah, for with intention to fulfill the mitzvah, he thinks I'm going to do the sukkah mitzvah, loket, he gets malchut for that, he gets lashes for that. As we see in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. If he makes sukkah 6 days, so then he's over on the other sort of sister mitzvah which goes with it, which is lo tigra. You shouldn't diminish. You can't decide there's less or more. Well, he's on to say, even if someone fabricates to make a brand new mitzvah, they're not adding on to any existing mitzvah, they've decided there's a new mitzvah that they can fit in, which is going to be great. Kugon, for example, so he quotes something which comes up in Shoftim, which is Yeravam ben Nevat, who was the first king of Israel. Amongst the various things he instituted which were not appropriate, was a festival. He decided he's going to make a festival in the month of Cheshvan, I think, and it was to be like a regal type festival, like a regalim type festival. And he instituted, so in his own mind, he thought that was going to be good, and probably for political reasons anyway. But it was very much a major avera. Over belav, you're over on the one would be over on this love. And he goes on to discuss Purim. I don't want to go into that in detail just in the interest of time, but he brings a Gemara about Purim, and how that Purim needs to have a certain source in the Torah to make that okay, so it's not a brand new initiative. And then he has the final line, which is going to be important for the rabbinic idea. Umasha tiknu hachamim. So this is the bolded line right at the bottom, or the second last line. Umasha tiknu hachamim mishum geder. Everything which the hachamim made as a fence, as a protection around the Torah. For example, the rules around arayot. Zul mitzvahim in our Torah. This is a mitzvah in the Torah to make this fence. And very importantly, only that we should know that it's only a fence. It's essential that we know what is biblical and what's not biblical. So Rashi had this definition that it's expanding onto existing mitzvot. Ramban adds in that even brand new mitzvot that are a big problem with this mitzvah, but the rabbinic law is okay, provided that we know what's rabbinic and what's Torah. And the Rambam, if we look at the next source, has a similar idea. So if we look at where it's bolded roughly, he goes on to he discusses it in general, but the important point I wanted to bring was that he's discussing basar v'chalav, meat and milk. And he says, if the rabbis had said, if the Rabbanim had v'yoser basar ha'of, they said chicken meat, for example, basar ha'of, fowl meat, which we know is rabbinic. On the biblical nature, it is not included in the command against eating meat and milk. So the pasuk we learn meat and milk from is lots of ashel gedi b'chalev more. One shouldn't cook a kid in his mother's milk. If they would say that if one was to say that the meat of chicken is included in that category of a gedi of a kid or meat, and that's asim in Torah, and that's a doraita, a biblical problem. This would be adding on. That would be a problem. So it's essential that we know what is and what isn't doraita. But the rabbis do have the authority, and Rabbanim do have the authority to make certain, and it's in fact a mitzvah to make certain boundaries surrounding the Torah, as long as it's clear what is what. Okay, turning over the page, I'm going to skip the whole top section just for the moment, and I want to look at the Rashba, which is the fourth source, and unfortunately got slightly cut off at the top in printing, but the Rashba has a slightly different direction on it. A little bit of background. He's coming to talk. He's speaking about a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. Gemara in Rosh Hashanah discussing the shofar case, where we have multiple times we blow shofar, even though that we could be yotze theoretically with a smaller selection of shofar blasts. We added on a lot of blasts. The Gemara has a particular reason, was in order to confuse the Satan, in order to arvei the Satan. That there are various ideas about that, but the Rashba and Tosfos has a similar question. Is why isn't that adding on to the Torah? Why Why isn't that a problem from the perspective of this Isser? So if you look at the Rashba, he says, this isn't an issue. We don't say here that there's an issue about Tosif. It's only when someone, an individual, someone who decides from himself that he's going to add on. For example, our Kohen case, where he decided he's going to throw in an extra bracha because he's feeling, I don't know, really inspired. I don't know. So he's decided, I'm going to throw in. That's going to be the issue. Or Yasham B'Shmini B'Sukkah, it's covered in the mitzvah. So someone who intended to do the mitzvah on Shmini Atzeret by sleeping in the sukkah. V'inami b'mar she'ira b'mikra. Okay, so other cases going on about Bamashem Amdu Hachamim, but that which the Hachamim set up, the tiknu, and they made this tikkun, this fixture, this enactment, L'tzorech Ein Kan Bal Tosef. This isn't Bal Tosef. To Kavah Amar Torah Al Pi Torah She'erucha, because we have other commands about following the Torah from the following what the Chachamim say. So for the Rashba, it's really the main point of Bal Tosef is not so much the Chachamim enactments, but it's when an individual decides, what, I can go above and beyond. So just to recap, and then a final point. So we have this mitzvah of Bal Tosef. There are different ways of defining what's included in Bal Tosef. So for Rashi, it's specifically, and it's not clear that he would be mutually exclusive with the others, but it seems to be an emphasis on when we have a mitzvah from the Torah, and then you're taking that mitzvah and you're expanding and you're building on it in an inappropriate way. For the Ramban and Rambam, it's even if you're instituting new things which aren't clear that they're new, which aren't clear that they're rabbinic by nature. And for the Rashba, actually, it's really the emphasis is more on the individual rather than the Chachamim. And there are separate mitzvahs to follow the Chachamim, as we know. That it's about when an individual sort of decides of his own volition to add on. Final point before we finish. Anyone have any ideas what sort of messages, what's the reasoning behind it, or what ideas come out from this mitzvah? Why is it so important not to add on or not to take away from the Torah to the next mitzvah? Christian thing, okay. Let's say it's specific, yeah. Well, certainly, I guess most of this would be certainly the early, yeah. Clearly not okay in our right. All right. So no, yeah. That sounds the basic ideas. I've written 3 sources down which have ideas behind it. So the Roseva kind of discusses, emphasizes the perfection of Torah, that Torah is complete and perfect, and this idea that we have this, we think we know better. The Torah is perfect and we can't add on to that in any way. The Netziv has a similar idea that it's slightly different. It's sort of emphasizing how we need to be careful not to try and create our own avenues too much, to sort of try and be machadesh, sort of new ways of serving Hashem, and the emphasis on 613 mitzvot are the ways of serving Hashem, and that's what is appropriate. That's from the Torah, and we can't extend, in different directions which are brand new just because we sort of feel that there's a certain element of service there. Right, exactly. So it needs to be what was commanded and not more. And a final idea, which was actually. There's another one which I just want to mention, which is what I brought at the end. Is translating from Sfar, which is kind of an interesting point from Chazal about the story of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, where this seems to be the first example of someone making taking on, I don't know, a chumrah, or taking on an extra command and deciding that there's something new. So the outside basically it accounts of where the stumble came in that, which was when, as we know, Hashem commanded that you can't eat from the tree. Adam and they interpreted that to be, and he made it that you can't touch from the tree. And that's it goes on to describe, I'm not going to read it inside, but how that was what actually led to the big avera that happened there, was by expanding it and not making it clear that the touching wasn't going to be the big problem, that the touching was just a boundary around the eating. Because that wasn't clear, that led to all the problems that ensued. So there's also a practical element that when it's not clear what is and what isn't biblically and directly from Hashem, then that can lead to major problems later on. Fine. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, well, first I would say that chumras don't necessarily come under Baal Tosif because chumras fit within the framework of halacha and may not come under the. It depends slightly on what the chumra is, but it may come under just being stringent in terms of which following the more stringent opinions. So that wouldn't necessarily fall directly under Baal Tosif. That would be, because that's within the framework of normative halachic opinion. In terms of decreasing, it's kind of interesting because I was looking up a little bit about that just to contrast. There are some who comment it's not actually so easy to see how you'd be in violation of Baal Tigra of detracting. There's a fine line between just not doing it, which is clearly a problem in its own right, but that's not detracting from the Torah exactly. That's just not doing the mitzvah. If you don't, you don't put on you don't shake your lulav. That's not exactly Baal Tigra. Perhaps, well, maybe it would be. But others comment that maybe there's a sort of finer line where you have to find where you're actually detracting, a sort of intentional detracting from the Torah. Whereas if you just don't do it, you just haven't done it. There are others who might, I don't know, I didn't see anyone, but I didn't look into Baal Tigra carefully, but there might be those who say that if you just don't do it, then that's an issue of Baal Tigra. But Baal Tigra is a little bit more finicky. It's a little bit more difficult to fine tune exactly where the mitzvah's lying. But clearly that it is a whole. You can't chop and change as you like. Yeah, so the Rashba, I didn't actually go on to read the rest of the Rashba, but the Rashba brings that. Did I bring the section the Rashba brings that? He says, he says the last line. So who has in B'chol Baal Tigra? Sorry. So he says this is the third line. You should know the Hashmini Shel Sukkah Bizman Hazeh Mitzvah Shel Dereim is a rabbinic. B'yeshnam Ba'ochlin So even though now we know that we don't need it anymore, we know the setting of the calendar. Right, so we don't need the second day per se, the extra days of Yom Tov. Beit Din, so according to Rashba, this is one of the examples where Beit Din have the power to enact things, which are clearly Beit Din enacted, but that wouldn't come under Baal Tosef. But again, that's clearly rabbinic, and that has there are other reasons behind Beit Din enactments. But again, even for the Rambam and Ramban, it's clear we know it's rabbinic. It's well known that it's no one's saying that's the right thing we have to do. So it wouldn't come directly onto this. This is really when we're trying to present something new as biblical when it doesn't have a source of meaning.
Take away with us this morning. I'm going to turn off the Zoom now, so I'll say goodbye to those people who are on Zoom. We are back again next week. I'll publish details of the speaker and topic during the course of the week. So I'll turn off the Zoom now, and then
have a good week.
Yeah, and I'll say the bracha achrona for those who've had breakfast here anyway. So, bye everyone on Zoom.
Sure.